Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to this webinar and happy AI Literacy Day. There are events happening all across the country and around the world, so we're very excited to be participating in this. As part of the celebration, we are presenting a live professional development series on AI literacy, and you can go to ailiteracyday.org/synchronous-pd for the full schedule. I will share that link in the chat. So throughout the day, you'll have the chance to do a deep dive into the future of technology alongside leading experts. And so for this webinar, we have Dr. Allison Scott, who is the CEO of the Kapor Foundation. She will be discussing AI and tech justice for K12 education. She will be covering issues related to algorithmic bias, ethical AI, data privacy, mitigating the harms of technologies on individuals and communities, and furthering our understanding about why this type of literacy is so critical for our young people. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please add them into the chat and then we will address them at the end. Welcome, Dr. Scott. Thank you so much for being here. We're very excited to have you, and take it away.
Thank you so much, and happy AI Literacy Day. Thank you all so much for joining, and thanks for dropping into the chat where you're joining from. We have quite a diverse range, which is awesome to see that there's such enthusiasm for AI literacy. So I am thrilled to be here to discuss a little bit about our concepts related to tech justice in AI literacy. So I am Allison Scott. I'm the CEO of the Kapor Foundation. For those of you who know us, we are a operating foundation based in Oakland, California. Our work is focused on addressing, trying to create a more equitable technology ecosystem that addresses inequality, creates economic opportunity, tackles critical societal issues, and reflects the power and perspectives of communities of color. So we do our work through a variety of different strategies, including we conduct research, we make strategic grants, we support policy change, and we also invest in new ideas and through entrepreneurs and funds. One of our longstanding areas of focus has been computer science equity. And more recently, we have become very interested in the topic of AI literacy for reasons that I will continue to explain. So before I continue on, I just wanted to give a shout out to my colleague, Shana White, who's actually in DC doing another set of activities for AI Literacy Day, but she was instrumental in creating the guide that I'll be referencing throughout the presentation. And she is a phenomenal former computer science educator and is now leading our work in CS equity at the foundation. So for our agenda today, I'd like to start by just giving a little bit of an overview of the AI landscape. And perhaps what I should say here as well is that I come from an education background, an education and research background, and I am not a technologist, but I have become very interested in the topics. I continue to learn. So hopefully, and I know how intimidating the topics can be. So hopefully we'll present this set of concepts in a way that can be both interesting and also approachable for folks from a variety of different backgrounds. Then we'll talk about our approach related to justice-centered AI literacy. We'll provide a couple examples of interrogation topics. And then would love to have as much interaction as we can in this virtual setting through the chat or through Q&A to get your feedback about topics that you see that are of interest, ways that you think you can integrate these topics into classrooms and across disciplines and subject areas, and hopefully just have a robust conversation. Okay, so starting off with the AI landscape, just a couple things that I wanted to highlight. So here's a quote from Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, who's a venture capitalist and author and one of the big thinkers around AI. His quote is, "AI is going to change the world more than anything in the history of mankind, more than electricity." Some people can hear this quote and think, that seems a little overblown. There are lots of debates, but I think it's a helpful way to ground the conversation about just how important this time is and how important this technology is to all aspects of our society. So two different things that I thought would be helpful to highlight just in terms of like where we are in the AI landscape. So one is that there's been a huge amount of investment in generative AI. You've probably seen headlines all over the place about some of the big companies, including OpenAI and Anthropic, and how they are getting huge investments from some of the big tech companies like Amazon and Microsoft. But as you can see from the chart on the right, this is from the Artificial Intelligence Index report from Stanford HAI. The amount of investment is surging tremendously. As at the same time, on the left side, you see that there is a lot more interest in regulation. Like, how do we understand this technology? How do we think about the regulation of this technology? And as many people saw, we did have an executive order come out from the Biden administration last fall. That helped to kind of articulate the first articulation of like the government's approach to regulating the space. Again, as a non-technologist, my caveat is there are lots of debates about the actual abilities of large language models, but I thought this was an important just summary graph. And this is from OpenAI about the performance of their different language models on some standardized tests. And I think the big takeaway here, we saw that GPT-4 was able to pass the bar exam, pass some of the medical licensing exams, pass some of the AP exams. So I would say the big takeaway here is just that the language models continue to evolve and get more accurate, at least in predicting standardized data. There's a whole other conversation about the things that they can't quite do well, hallucinations, bias in data, et cetera. But this is helpful to see just how advanced this technology has actually become. And I'd be curious to hear how many folks have started playing around with AI in ways to generate additional content beyond just text. So everything from video using OpenAI's model, Sora, to Stable Diffusion's model, to create images and also create audio has been a really interesting evolution of this technology. And on the other side, lots of potential challenges have come along with these promising developments as well. And then finally, in education, what we do know is that students are using generative AI. Some data shows that students are using generative AI more than faculty members. There's another study that showed that teachers, I believe it was K12 teachers, are really beginning to utilize the tools and start to better understand the tools. It looks like 53% have said they've had coursework that requires them to use AI as a part of an assignment, which is a huge growth from maybe just 2 years prior. And then the other piece that we spend a lot of time talking about, which is the level of access that students have to computer science, which at this point is one of the only disciplines that will allow them to go deep into understanding the technologies, understanding algorithms. We argue that we should be integrating across all subject areas, but for now, we know that students still lack access to computer science across the country. So just a little bit less than 60% of all high schools offer CS. And there are significant disparities by race and in participation by gender as well as income. So my main takeaway here is while students are using the tools, students have less opportunity to develop the concepts, the content, the knowledge behind the development of those tools. So a couple of the benefits and opportunities, we've probably seen some of these headlines about some of the ways, not overhyped ways, but some of the examples of how generative AI and artificial intelligence is helping to evolve our disease detection, drug development, AI in education to support multilingual students in learning English, as well as AI in agriculture. So lots of promising opportunities for harnessing this technology for the potential of solving like really complex and entrenched problems in our society. And at the same time, something that we've been focused a lot on is the myriad of challenges and risks associated with this technology. So everything from the implications on teen girls' mental health from social media algorithms to the potential economic trends, the potential economic shifts that might happen when workers might be displaced through automation as the technologies continue to evolve, to the climate impacts, to mis and disinformation, to the ability for those tools that can make audio to replicate voices, and then our inability to be able to determine if those voices are accurate or if they are not. There was just a study out recently about the assessing the ability of the major platforms to detect AI-generated content, and the headline was that they all failed miserably. And then similarly on how the AI models are developed and trained, and what that means for privacy, data, copyright infringement, et cetera. One of the things that we're most concerned about as we think about not just the risks overall, but the risks that impact specific communities and communities that many times have been most marginalized through previous generations. So I thought this headline was very interesting. So federal regulators call AI discrimination a new civil rights frontier. Some of the examples of things that we've seen at the intersection of AI and racial and social justice. I'm not sure how many of you all know of Dr. Joy Buolamwini, who's on the left. Her amazing research, I believe when she was a doctoral student or a postdoc at MIT, demonstrated the inability of facial recognition software to accurately detect darker skinned faces, and then the implications that then has for things like the gentleman on the right, who was wrongly accused of committing a crime based on facial recognition technology utilized by a police department. So both bias in the algorithms and then very real implications in individuals' lives. Similarly, in the mortgage lending space, people of color, I believe it was Black, Latinx, and Asian, were much less likely to be approved for loans, for home loans, which again has significant implications on their economic outcomes. Medical algorithms, which were trained on previous data sources that also had inherent biases in them, were less likely to predict or to suggest treatments for specific groups. So lots of challenges in using the technologies, the technologies, understanding the biases in the underlying data sets. And then one of the pieces that we also do at the Kapor Center is we're following on the tech policy side. So there is an ongoing lawsuit against YouTube, Facebook, Reddit about their role in their algorithms helping to radicalize folks with a variety of different perspectives. But in this particular case, the mass shooter in Buffalo who targeted African-American citizens. So with this background, what we have been focused on over the last year or so has been, how do we advance a justice-centered approach to AI literacy? And I'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by that. So I love this quote from Dr. Alondra Nelson. If you don't know of her work, she's amazing. She was the former acting director of the White House Office of Science and Tech Policy. And she was one of the authors of the AI Bill of Rights that came out before the executive order. So highly recommend to check that out. What she says is that although AI systems are powerful, they remain tools made by humans, and their uses are not preordained. Their effects are not inevitable. So I think what I take away from this quote is, we still have the opportunity to create the guardrails that we want to create, to develop the perspectives that we want to create about how to best utilize these tools, when to utilize these tools, what new tools to develop, what problems that we want to solve in the future. So I think that's an optimistic way to approach the space. So our quick rationale, I won't spend too much time on this. One, just that the AI landscape is rapidly evolving. Pretty much everyone is trying to figure out how to harness this technology for good while putting in guardrails to minimize risk. We believe the K16 education space will be essential to ensuring students are prepared for this new frontier. But in order to do that, we'll need to undergo significant transformation to develop a robust and diverse pipeline of the future scholars, technologists, artists, policymakers, et cetera, to engage in this new frontier. And so we also believe then a bold new vision is needed to transform the ways we're preparing students for the tech and AI-driven future, while we ensure that equity, justice, and ethics are at the core. So I'd love to understand more about where you all are coming from, how much you have begun to integrate AI literacy in schools, districts, organizations. I think we still have quite a long ways to go, but it's exciting to see this level of momentum around the topic. Okay, so our new vision. So the new vision for responsible AI and tech justice in K12 in particular would be, we want to have a robust and comprehensive course of study that utilizes a racial justice and social justice lens to equip all students with the knowledge and resources to critically interrogate the ethical and equitable development, deployment, and impacts of AI, while simultaneously challenging, disrupting, and remedying the harms that these technologies can produce within individuals' lives, communities, and society at large. So I know that's a huge mouthful. A couple quick points that I wanted to make here. So one, we don't think it's just about understanding how the technology is developed, but interrogating who created the technology, why was it created, what are the impacts of the technologies. And also, I think what we want to be pushing for is for students to be thinking, to be future thinking and thinking about both by understanding what exists now, how can they create even more phenomenal solutions for the future. And I should also say one more thing here. That is not clear where, this is a whole other discussion, but it's not clear where this yet fits in education. And I think that's a huge challenge for all of us to kind of wrestle with and to be, putting forth ideas and advocating for, do we want to make sure that these concepts get integrated into every discipline, into every classroom? Do we need a whole separate focus area? I know there are many different conversations ongoing, but I think that's a big piece for us to consider. Like, how do we move towards this vision in our current system? So this is the guide. I'll make sure to share the link so folks can download it if you're interested. So the guide has the definition that I mentioned. We had an amazing group of advisors, some of these names that you'll recognize, leading scholars in the field of artificial intelligence, bias in tech, racism in computing, education equity. And they have been phenomenal in helping to pull this work together. So I wanted to pause there and then describe what the guide actually has. So we have this vision. If we believe that vision could be, if we want to pursue that vision, there are 6 core components that we've kind of outlined as critical to advancing that vision. And I'll go through each of them. And then, as I said before, we'll have time to dive into a few of them. So the first is to examine the AI technology creation system, from who designs and develops products and how they're developed to who invests in their creation and benefits from their adoption. That is a whole mouthful. I think it's a really important area to discuss. I think a lot of students have used ChatGPT. Are they familiar that ChatGPT is a tool from the company OpenAI, and then who invests in OpenAI and who's on OpenAI's board, and what are the kind of orientations that they're bringing to this work? What are their ultimate goals? What is their vision for the creation of this technology? I think it's a really important piece for us to examine. The second was to interrogate the complex relationship between technology and human beings, including human-computer interaction, topics of values, ethics, privacy, and safety. A lot of work has been done on this at the Stanford Center for Human and Artificial Intelligence, but kind of exploring the topics of what is the role of some of the core elements of being human versus like what can robots accomplish? What are humans innately good at? Where do those things merge? Where should they merge? How do we keep pieces of it separate? Lots to discuss there. The third is to explore the impacts and implications of AI technologies on society, including the positive benefits, the negative consequences, and the perpetuation of exclusion, marginalization, and inequality. I think there's a lot of overlaps here for something like the ethnic studies requirement here in the state of California. And there are so many examples of both of the positive benefits and also the ways in which previous inequality is continuing to perpetuate additional inequality. So examples are if there are biases in specific data sets that are being trained, that algorithms are being trained on, those biases then get replicated and then have very real consequences for folks on the other end. The fourth is to interrogate personal usage of AI technologies. So I know there's work on digital literacy, but really wanting to make sure that students or young people are critical consumers of the products that they use, and they're able to address misuse, exploitation, and safety concerns. We'll do a deep dive into this one in a second. The fifth is to build a critical lens in the usage, analysis, interpretation, and reporting of data. So here, really digging into understanding algorithmic bias, understanding data sets, like asking questions of data sets. Where did data sets come from? What could have been some challenges in either collecting that data, utilizing the data, et cetera. And then last but not least, minimize, mitigate, and eliminate the harm and injustice caused by AI technologies through the responsible and ethical creation process and individual and collective right to refusal. So I think this one is this is where we'd love to see our education space moving, where students are now thinking they've gotten like the interrogation of technologies. They've thought about different data sources. They've thought about their own use, and now they can think through the creation process of new technologies and ways to utilize these to advance good. In the guide, you'll see, I just kind of highlighted them really quickly, but you'll see the core components. With each core component, there's a set of sample interrogation questions. The core components are a guide for educators, parents, policymakers, advocates to hopefully design learning experiences across educational settings. The sample interrogation questions provide kind of just some suggested ideas, some suggested questions, while allowing space for creativity, innovation, and evolution as the space evolves, understanding that educators are extremely talented and creative and know their populations best. So asking, so we just wanted to provide some sample questions. And importantly, we aim to ensure that these concepts are used by K-12 educators across disciplines and pathways to inform their instruction, their pedagogy, their policies, and their curricular resources. I should also add that a lot of these concepts kind of naturally are more geared towards middle and high school. But my colleague Shana is actually working on a set of interrogation questions specifically focused on elementary, so we can translate these concepts even to the K-5 space. Okay, a few examples to dig a little bit deeper. So as we talked about building a critical lens in the usage, analysis, interpretation, and reporting of data, Here are just a couple examples. There are a million different examples that could be pulled from and brought into different lessons. One is your personal information is probably being used to train generative AI models. So a deep dive into where is the data coming from that that LLMs are using to train their models. Should companies be allowed to use our data from sources like YouTube? If you've uploaded a video, they've now been transcribing, YouTube videos into text to use that text to then train the LLMs. Should artists and writers be compensated if their data is used to train LLMs? And maybe even content creators who have uploaded a ton of videos to YouTube. There's an active lawsuit right now with the New York Times against OpenAI and Microsoft for that very topic. So these are just a couple interrogation questions that I could see being applied in math, in English, and persuasive writing, in government, and in computer science. And I'm sure many others that I haven't thought about. Second one, as we talked about the interrogation of personal usage of technology. So we know that young people are incredibly A, tech savvy, and B, use social media a ton. So this little graph at the bottom, nearly 1 in 5 teens say they're on YouTube and TikTok almost constantly. So students are using their devices as well as social media a lot. We also know from a variety of different sources and research that the social media algorithms have had significant implications on the mental health, for example, of teenage girls, in addition to helping to spread mis and disinformation. So some of the questions here could be just a basic understanding of how our social media algorithms developed. How are they optimized for attention? How does that then relate back to things like how social media is driving a mental health crisis for teens? How do algorithms impact the information in your social media feeds? Just in like anecdotal conversations with teenagers, some of whom are in my family. I feel like there's a variety of different levels of knowledge about how the algorithms are actually feeding the content that goes into their feeds versus it being a standard set of information that all, let's say, 17-year-old boys are getting. How are marginalized groups more impacted by mis and disinformation spread online? And then the TikTok ban is a hot topic and top of mind for many people and many young people. So maybe a whole discussion about should social media companies be sued for algorithms driving mis or disinformation? What does a TikTok ban mean? Why would TikTok be banned? What does that actually, I didn't even put that here. What does our affiliation with China have to do with our perspective about this particular company? And is this particular company any better or worse than any of the companies that currently operate out of the United States? So potential areas of content integration, digital literacy, English, writing, law, ethnic studies, history. I put law. That should say government. I don't think we have any law courses. And I'm sure there are a variety of different ideas that you all have of ways to open up these conversations and help to develop this like set of critical interrogation among our students. So I'm going to shift to Q&A, and I have some prompt questions for you all, but if you have any for me, I would be more than happy to answer them. So very, very curious, which topics resonate most with you? Which topics do you think your students are interested in? Are there, off the top of your heads, additional examples of ways you could integrate these topics into your classroom, your school, your district, or your organization? And I will pause and I will check the chat. Scott, I think that's a great question. How many companies use r/student data? Is that an idea that you have for, is that a question for me or an idea for us to also explore? Yes, absolutely. And Scott, to that point, I would say there's also one of the things that we've seen, and I know you're seeing in schools and districts, is a proliferation of new tools that are promising to do a whole variety of things, some of which I'm sure will be able to do great things. But the data collection piece, I think, is really important in terms of in classrooms and in schools, what access do they have to that data? Then separately, just data that we're sharing every time we do anything on our phones. Are we aware of our privacy settings? Does our Snapchat allow any individual to be able to track our current location if we post a snap? Okay. The part about AI being misused to wrongfully convict reminds me of, yes, Chelsea, that is another fantastic book. And definitely one of the leaders in the field. And so like that could be another opportunity to bring in either that book or like pieces of that book to have a broader conversation. And I think not only young people, but I think after having done enough of these presentations, I think a lot of adults just aren't aware of some of the ways in which AI is being used to wrongfully convict folks. There was a recent story. There was another recent example out of Detroit, I believe, where an 8-month pregnant woman was jailed for falsely. And what's interesting is when you go back, it's very hard to prove that was not you. And then, when you go back to the police department, they're like, well, this is what the tool told us. This is what the algorithm told us. And they don't necessarily understand the algorithms or the data that went into training the algorithms either. Mara, how can we make sure students feel that educators care about the issues of bias that AI often exhibits? I love that question. My personal opinion, I think, which is kind of why we frame all of this in like a justice-centered perspective, is I think starting with those issues first. I think a lot of students care a lot about those topics in particular. And I think starting there as opposed to starting with, like what's an algorithm? How do you train an algorithm? What are the data sources? I think that could be a way to get them, to get students deeply engaged in the topic. Just my opinion. We have stopped, Seema, we have stopped focusing on the AI tools and have been focusing on embedding your guide with existing units. Fantastic. That's so great to hear. Thank you. I would love to hear how it's going. Stephen, all of these areas are of concern, but in particular, I worry about access to tools and education around these issues. Exactly. Stephen, I think that's something like that is absolutely what we are super interested in and invested in. So as we said, 2 things. One, we want these concepts to be integrated across K-12 and all disciplines. But also, we cannot forget that 57%, that's just computer science courses in high schools. We still have a long ways to go in even preparing or providing equal access to computing topics based on like social and economic status. So it also potentially gives us an opportunity. I don't have an answer, but I think it gives us an opportunity to think really clearly about how do we address issues of inequity in education on the front end, knowing that this topic is so critical and essential at this moment. Do you have links to resources? Yes, Chelsea, that was the one thing I didn't mention, which is that in the guide there, Shayna spent a bunch of time pulling together like everything from links to articles to like lots of different like commentaries so that you don't have to look things up if you want to just get started with a couple examples. That is in the appendix of the guide that we'll make sure to share with you. And Seema, it's going well, but slow and steady. Students are engaged with learning about these big tech companies, their motives, and exposing more students to CS and engineering for all students. Exactly. I think that's fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm really excited to learn more about how it's going and the things in particular that are resonating with students. One quick anecdote about exposing more students to CS and engineering, and it was a previous comment too about talking about issues of bias, is I think one of the mistakes of advancing computer science work, which I've been a part of the broader CS community, so I can take some of the blame too, was focusing on the content and like trying to get more students into these courses to develop understanding of the content, as opposed to like these broader, what are the societal implications of all of these topics? And I think that's something that as we know, resonates with a lot more students. Okay, Raphael. The topic of AI and racial bias, I think there's a perception that technology is objective. But like you brought up, tech is designed by humans with bias. Yes, Ruha Benjamin is another fantastic book that I highly recommend. That is listed in our appendix as well, and a great book to share with your students as well. Okay, keep them coming. I've been told I have to end right at 12, so I'm trying to be mindful of time. But love your comments and questions. This is like fantastic. Two quick things I wanted to mention. We have a new RFP that's out, that's live. Applications are due at the end of this month, so you still have time to get it in. What we're really interested in is like, we can put out the concepts, but you all are the educators with all of the knowledge of how this, when the rubber meets the road, like how to apply this in classrooms and schools and districts. And so we have an RFP for implementation. So just propose some new ideas, resources, projects that can articulate these core components. And we are just trying to kind of learn collaboratively about how these concepts can be adopted across subjects and across grade bands. And hopefully we can open source this information so that educators across the country can also continue to expand their learning on this topic. And 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay. So this is my ending quote. So I think to realize the promise of AI to advance humanity, which is where a lot of the conversation is, and especially a lot of the conversation in the tech ecosystem, we also have to put that and address the longstanding injustice and inequality that we see. We must equip all students with the skills to interrogate existing technologies, and encourage the creativity necessary to design more equitable tools and solutions. So we don't just want students who are highly critical. We do want them to be highly critical. We also want them to be thinking about how can they create more equitable tools and solutions for our future. And that is my last slide. So just a few ways to take action. If you haven't already, I'm doing the same thing. Like, I am trying to learn every day as quickly as I can. I would just recommend like play around with some of the tools to gain familiarity into what they can and can't do. You'll quickly spot areas that they're not quite polished, or they're not quite as good as what you would expect a human to be good at. But I think it's just helpful to gain familiarity. Apply to our RFP if you're interested. Just try out a new lesson or topic in the classroom to the extent that you have access to resources and can bring it in. It would be very interesting to just see how that goes. And then as we know from AI EDU and Innovate EDU, there are lots of national and statewide efforts in each of your locations to expand AI and CS education. So please join us as we continue to help to advance this work.
All of the resources and this recording will be emailed to all the registrants, so look out for that next week. Dr. Scott, thank you so much. What an incredible presentation. Super fascinating. Lots for us to think about. So thank you everybody for joining. And
thank you so much.
Yeah. Happy AI Literacy
Thank you everyone
Day.
for joining.
Thank you.